Hello, my name is Joshua Stolzers, and I'm doing my case study on ethnic exclusion in the Mennonite Church, a Goshen College case study. The issue. Race relations have always been tense around the world, especially in the U.S. The foundation of Christian theology, the largest religion in the world, is based on love and acceptance, but sometimes this is difficult to see. The Mennonite denomination, a Christian denomination, specifically states in its confession of faith to be a tradition against all forms of violence, including hostility among races and classes. Goshen College states its religious affiliation is with the Mennonite Church USA and is welcoming of all individuals of all faiths and backgrounds. So the problem is, on Goshen College's campus, I, as well as others, witness certain forms of exclusions toward those who don't identify with the Mennonite faith, and often those who are of different ethnic groups. Some, including myself, call this phenomenon the Mennonite Wall. I thought it would be good to give a quick refresher on race relations in the United States, especially between Black and white people throughout American history. So throughout history, there have been many examples of conflict that have been conceived over racial and ideological differences, which are often combined. We see the formation of in and out groups, which I'll talk about more later. There are many examples, including crusades, gangs, colonization, slavery, segregation, and today we see that in racial tensions. Segregation, blacks and white throughout American history. Much of U.S. infrastructure in the 17th and 18th century was built by enslaved Africans and African Americans. As time passed, things got better. There's the passing of Jim Crow laws, which is still an era of segregation. The Plessy versus Ferguson case stated that institutions must be separate, be equal. This led to a lot of discrimination, a lot of housing and zoning discrimination, forming ghettos in black neighborhoods. Rise of the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s led to a lot of new opportunities for people of color. Saw the passing of the Brown versus Board of Education trial, the Civil Rights Act, and the Voting Rights Act. Today we still see quite a bit of discrimination in the United States, though not as blatant as it used to be. Today, African Americans in the U.S. are subject to the highest rates of incarceration in the world. Black communities are also located in some of the poorest regions of the states. Food deserts next to industrial plants, which lead to high rates of medical issues, poor medical responses in African American neighborhoods. Repeated deaths of African Americans at the hands of police, cases like Eric Gardner and Trayvon Martin, started responses from many people, including the formation of the Black Lives Matter movement. So racial tensions are high in the U.S. right now. I want to talk a little bit about Christianity and the Mennonite Church, some of their history. Christianity has had a history of violence and exclusion, though it is a religion based in love acceptance. For example, the Inquisition, Crusades, War on Religion, and Anti-Semitism, the medieval Crusades in the Middle East by European Christians were a classic example of us versus them. White Christians saw Jerusalem as the center of the world and saw it surrounded by large amounts of what they saw as darker, evil people. This led to an era of Christian ethnocentrism and eventually colonialism surrounding areas. There's also been a long-standing conflict between Jews and Christians throughout history through conflicting theology and misunderstanding of practices. This is thought to play a part in fueling anti-Semitic rioting in Germany by German Protestants. In the early 20th century, German pastors and theologians used race to explain social hierarchies that God had set in place, which we know leads to a lot of the thinking that led to the Holocaust. Miroslav Volf in his essay, The Social Meaning of Reconciliation, comments on the nature of Christianity. He sees much of the violence in Christianity as a commitment to Christians' culture and ethnicity rather than Jesus' gospel. So the goals of your in-group, of your ethnicity, of your country, usually take precedent over Jesus' teaching. He also comments on monotheism as intrinsically exclusive. One God, whereas other gods are not the true God, naturally forms in and out groups. The Bible is also a powerful tool to interpret in different ways, which I will move on to now. There's a lot of ways to interpret how the Bible handles slavery. There were many pro-slavery writers who contributed often to the Cotton is King publication. People like Hawkins, Hammond, and Blados. They claim that notable figures in the Old Testament encouraged slavery. It's natural, like Noah and the curse of Canaan, where Ham saw Noah naked and cursed his son, and his descendants all have darker skin. They cite Abraham as a slave owner and someone who encouraged slavery. They also claim it's fundamental in Israeli history. Leviticus 25 says, go into surrounding areas, take slaves, and there are passages in Exodus that claim the precedent of slavery over that of even marriage. And they also claim that in Jesus' teaching, it was not openly combated. Jesus didn't really address this issue, so therefore it must not have really been a problem. But at the same time, there are many people who fought these arguments. Barnes, Weld, and Bourne, all notable anti-slavery writers. They said that just slavery in the Old Testament does not justify slavery in the United States today and in the past. Canaanites are not Africans, and Americans have no claim on this ruling over people. And a lot of these things that were said were the words of Moses, not God. They also touch on the deliverance of Israel from slavery. It was Hebrew people's bondage was far more merciful and humane than that of Negro people in the past. And in the end, they were still delivered by God. So God's end all was not slavery. They also touched on the specifics of servitude in Moses' time. Slavery was voluntary. They could be freed at any time. Slavery occurred when a person offered themselves to repay a debt, and so on. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about Mennonite history, and especially in the context of segregated America. So Mennonites have a history of persecution in European settings. Many Mennonites trace their ancestry back to Swiss German or Russian roots. During the Reformation, Mennonites separated themselves from Protestants, distancing themselves for their belief in nonviolence and rebaptism. Because of their commitment to nonviolence and being caught in a conflicting period of Catholicism and Protestantism, many were put to death, and could only find refuge from place to place. They were forced out of many countries. Eventually, they finally found refuge in America, where freedom of religion, where religion wasn't quite as big a deal. So in the 20th century, Mennonites really struggled with contemporary social issues. In the past, they had been relatively distanced from society, often seen as an outcast group because they were persecuted so often. But in American, they found themselves in the in group rather than the out group, because they were white and they were European, and African Americans were the ones who were ostracized. During periods of world wars, Mennonites left their rural settings to come and face urban America. In many respects, they were socialized to the segregated way of the United States at that time. This is especially evident in some like Mennonite institutions, and such as EMU. EMU, located in a southern state, but didn't admit African Americans until the first one in 1948. Also, in the 30s and 40s, mission churches were being built for African Americans, which made white Mennonite communities pretty nervous. They implemented separate services and rituals. For example, the right hand of fellowship and the holy kiss and feet washing all needed to be performed by another African American on one African American. Yeah, so these are just some of the ways that Mennonites were socialized into segregated America. Now I want to talk about racial sciences and pseudosciences that kind of played a part into racist thinking in the past, but maybe not so much today. Natural group aversion is something that we as humans and our ancient ancestors have experienced throughout history. Humans have evolved in social settings, especially relying on communal living. If you have food and I don't, and we're in the same group, most likely you'll share that food with me for the benefit of the group. So it was really pitting your group against nature and those surrounding your group. So there's a natural subconscious bias towards us rather than them. And we are often a product of our environment. So being raised in these groups, naturally you'll have those bias. And sometimes we see that today, especially in projects like the Project Implicit Test, which I'll talk about in a second. Today, a lot of studies have illustrated our natural biases through experiments. Rhesus macaques stare longer at out-group members than in-group. Some of our ancient ancestors, but still represents a instinctual response to be more suspicious of those in the out-groups. There's Project Implicit Tests, which may show us our biases, especially categorizing different ethnicities with good and bad. That most of the time you'll naturally place your in group with the good, out groups with the bad. But there's also the possibility of psychological training of our brains to combat this instinctual suspicion of outgroups. People can take more time in reviewing a application of a person of color, or just really giving the brain time to rationalize the situation rather than going with instinctual methods of dealing with things.